Good morning, welcome to Sahara TV Breakfast Show. And this morning we're going to be looking at African history, culture, and the history of imperialism in Africa. Joining me on the show today is Dr. Temitope Fagunwa, aka Maberu. He is an Afrobeat musician and a lecturer at the Department of History and International Studies at the Osun State University. Thank you for joining us, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, before we dig into the discussion for today, let's look at the newspaper headlines for today. The first paper I have here is the Daily Independent, which has a screaming headline: Arase backs integration of vigilantes into national security. There's also the headline which says Life Insurance, Tinubu directs backlog payment to deceased soldiers' families. And the National Tribune, we have Lagos-Ibadan Cargo Rail begins operation. For Daily Trust newspapers, we have 936 people die in boat accidents in the last 3 years. For The Guardian, the headline this morning is Obaze panel hunts conspirators in alleged 7 trillion naira frauds linked to former CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele. For The Punch newspaper, Labour threatens indefinite strike and gives 1 week ultimatum. And Vanguard newspaper this morning, 2023 budget in danger as crude output crashes by 470,000 barrels per day. Those are the newspaper headlines for this morning. Let's get back to our guest in the studio now to talk about the topic, the major discourse for today. Like I said, we have Dr. Temitope Fagunwa, aka Maberu, in the studio with us. He's an Afrobeat musician and also a lecturer of history. He's an historian and a lecturer of history and international studies at the Osun State University. So, welcome to the show, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with understanding what imperialism is. What do you think the term imperialism in the African context that is, and what are some of the key characteristics of this imperialism in Africa?
Well, I think that the history of human societies, I've always pointed to, the emergence and the decline of societies, the emergence and decline of kingdoms and empires that have consistently been, a phase or phases of, humankind, of, the genesis of human society. So imperialism has consistently been a phenomenon, in world history. The emergence of, a powerful society, taking over a smaller society, turning the society into a vassal state, So what that really means is that you would always have, the emergence of a powerful, people, a powerful society taking over the entirety of the structures, the institutions of a less powerful society. But within the context of African history, and I think this is very, very important, this is subject matter that we cannot ignore. Our experience with those that have invaded our homelands, those that we can call the imperialist forces, the imperialist powers in Africa, appears to be quite different from other people. Our history of imperialism is quite different from that of the Haitians, from that of in fact, the Europeans, from that of the Amerindians, from that of other human societies. And I'm saying this because the earliest invasion that you can point to in African history was the invasion of Kemet, ancient Egypt, in 325 BC by the Assyrians, because many people do not understand the fact that what we call the earliest Egyptian civilization is clearly a product of black pharaohs. It's clearly a product of black people. But when you look at, Egypt today, when you look at the entirety of North Africa today, you would think that the Arabs have consistently been there, when in actual fact, the sons and daughters of Arabs that are living in the, in the region known as West Africa today, they are nothing but the product of those that invaded, their ancestors that invaded our homelands, as far back as the 7th century. The point is that North Africa, Egypt specifically, went from black to brown to white to what it is today as a result of, imperialist invasions of our homelands. Why that of the African people is quite different is that the imperialist forces, those that have invaded our homelands, since time immemorial, have consistently used two things to justify their invasions. If they do not use religion, they will use color. The Europeans use color, in taking over the entirety of our forces, under the banner of the Atlantic slavery. Yeah. And they also use religion. Christianity was an emblem of, European imperialist control in Africa. Within that context also, Arab imperialism in Africa is also justified or was built on the bulwark of Islam as a religion. The instruments of religion have consistently been used by the enemies of the African people to oppress them, to control them, to keep them in perpetual darkness, which is what we are seeing, which is what which is what we are experiencing today, the outcomes, the legacies of this period in our history. So Arab imperialism, European imperialism that have consistently been terrible periods in our history are rooted in our existence today because they are being justified against the emblem of religion and color.
All right. One of the things we'll also be looking at today is the fact that there's been a supposed uprising in Africa against this imperialism, which has existed even after colonialism. But I want you to talk about what are the main arguments for using elections or the ballot to defeat imperialism. Since most African countries got independence, there's been elections, quite all right, but they've not been the kinds of elections that can change society. So what arguments would you make for using the ballot, as most people would say?
Yeah, for some of us, we are very, very clear about the predicaments that confront the African masses, the African people today. We have no illusion that we have achieved the so-called independence. Since the 60s, the so-called independence we've had on the African continent is nothing but what you can classify as flag independence. To be independent implies that the entirety of the resources in your homeland are under your whims and caprices, but that's not the reality of today. The entirety of the resources we have across the African continent are under the whims and caprices of agents of the international finance capital and, their bosses in Europe, in London, and in all of these places. So really, there's no independence. There's, at best, it's a question of flag independence. So right now, we think that this society, the African society, is a classical example of what a neo-colonial society is. Ultimately, nothing has changed. Just the players, the footballers, the personalities have indeed changed, not the structures, not the institutions, not the systems, that beget, these elements that ensure the existence of these elements in the first instance. Colonialism haven't been defeated, is yet to be defeated on the African continent, and that is why we think that the African continent today is a neo-colonial society. It's a society under the dominance of the imperialist forces, the agents of finance capital, like I made reference to earlier on, and the government, the big government, across the Western Bloc, the United Snakes of America is a perfect example of this. The United Kleptomaniac, otherwise a country known as United Kingdom. But in actual fact, it's actually, the right name for that country is United Kleptomaniac because of, the terrible things that country have done in the history of humankind. So the point that is being made is that for us to be able to achieve economic liberation or total liberation or total independence, there must necessarily be, a dismantling of those structures, of those institutions that were created intentionally by the colonizers to disrupt, to destroy, to truncate our existence as a people, because people are, really you cannot point to a system today, a political system, an economic system, or a socio-cultural system existing today in Africa that clearly has nothing to do with the imprint of the colonizers. So what that really means is that we haven't been decolonized. We haven't moved away from the, unfortunate outcomes of colonialism. As a matter of fact, as fella told us, we are really perambulating, and that is why all of these things going on, elections and all that. And I mean, to your question, in actual fact, for some of us, we don't share any illusion in any Western, system or structure. The current electoral system is nothing but, a direct mirror from Europe, from, America and all of these societies in actual fact. Yeah. We don't think, and this is very, very important, no society. Don't forget that at a point in time, America itself was a subject of British imperialism. Yeah. The Chinese were once, victim of, foreign imperialism. Societies have been victims of imperialism. But one thing is very, very, important. All of these societies, the Americans did not get the British off their back by going to the, polling booths. The ballot system, has never been an instrument of liberation for any oppressed people. That's the reality. Okay. We want people to point to us, societies that have been liberated, societies that have gotten the imperialist forces off their backs using the ballot system. That has never happened. And that is not going to start, in Africa.
Conversely, so what you just said now is like in what we're seeing in reality now, where a sudden wave of coup is running around Africa. So is this using the gun? Does it look like the solution? Does it look like the way to achieve this dismantling that you talked about?
Well, this is it. You see, when Malcolm X was asked, Malcolm X, the great African-American, revolutionary, when he was asked about the assassination of J.F. Kennedy, that what does he have to say with respect to that? He said, no, that he's not catching any feeling with respect to that, because, whenever you have a society like this, Malcolm X gave, an important phrase. He said the chickens would always come home to roost. So what is happening today, the volatile political, economic, military climate, the volatile climate that we have, across the African continent, not just West Africa, because people are really talking about what is happening in Central Africa, what is happening in North Africa, what is happening in East Africa and southern parts of Africa. What is happening is nothing but a product or a reflection of our chickens coming home to roost. The existing so-called civilian administrations, governments, the heads of state across the African continent are extremely useless elements. The heads of state across the African continent, we have got to be frank about it. They are the most backward, they are the most primitive in the history of the ruling class. In the history of the ruling class, whatever society, we've never had, we've never had, this level of indifference, backward, insincere, elements, at the helms of affair. Unconcerned about the progress of the African continent. It doesn't matter whether you're in Kenya, whether you're in Sierra Leone, whether you are in Ghana. All of these elements, they agree on one thing. And what do they agree on? The continuous destruction of the African continent. Yeah. They have no remorse. They share no remorse. And that's why every now and then they go to India, they pack themselves like sardine, go to all of these places with a begging bowls, disgracing the entirety of the African continent. No single leader today within the African continent that has, a mind of his or her own.
Okay, so you said earlier that there has not been a case in history where the ballots have successfully countered imperialism in Africa. Well, what about the other argument, which is what we are seeing now, the coup, what seemed the revolution, so to say? Has there been cases in Africa that we can point to where a coup has been able to stop or fight or face actively imperialism in Africa?
Oh, yes. Let us don't forget that for those that are telling us today that the guns, is a primitive way of achieving revolution, achieving liberation, they have little or no understanding of our history of struggles, armed struggle in the African continent. Independence was not gotten in some places within the African continent without armed struggle, direct armed struggle. In Guinea-Bissau, they did not achieve independence from the Portuguese by going to the polling booths. You know, it wasn't the question of negotiation. It was the question of armed struggle. Also in Angola, also in, you know, in several, in Cameroon, in fact, in Nigeria, as a matter of fact, across the African continent, many people aren't making references to it. You know, the about women revolt that happened in this country in 1929 is nothing but an expression of what an armed struggle is. The shooting of miners back in Enugu is also a reflection of the refusal of our people to surrender absolutely to the whims and caprices of the colonial state. Don't forget, there were several cases of resistance. You know, so people that are not telling us today that we should ignore what is happening in across the West African Francophone countries, we should, you know, pay no attention to it because they are being carried out, they are being masterminded by coup plotters, that we should ignore the question of God. They are really not saying the truth to the people, you know, because there was a point in time in our history where the guns got us to where we needed to be. And for some of us, we are very, very clear about it. We are not agitators, we are not supporters of military coups, but, you know, our chickens will always come out to roost. The existing military, head of state across, as we have said, they have nothing to show for their existence.
Okay.
They've don't destroy the entire. Look at the last election we had in this country. Let us don't forget that since 2015, most expensive elections ever to be held in Africa are consistently being held in this country since 2015. Mm-hmm. You know, where mass of our resources, you know, are being diverted into the persecution of electionary, you know, processes that have no direct connection to progress of the people. You know, we've had massive elections, massive riggings, massive spendings, you know, mismanagement going on. But what did the Nigerian masses have to show for this? Homelessness, you know, joblessness in most cases, you know, poverty here and there. You know, just one getting
out of school children.
It is exactly. So there's absolutely nothing to show for this, because all of these electoral systems, you know, institutions are still under the direct control of a tiny members of this society.
All right. So, in order not to sound violent or like someone that is calling for the invasion of arms in order to liberate us, I also want you to talk about, is this coup that is currently going on, does it seem like a solution? Because it's looking like taking from one imperialism to another. Does it look like it is the solution from what you can see and based on historical perspectives or antecedents?
No. Ultimately, to transform a society, you must understand, you must have a clearer understanding of what is wrong with that society. You must have the alternatives, the economic alternatives, which is about the most important thing for us. You know, whatever program, whatever slogan you are coming up with, if you are not clearly addressing the question of the economic alternatives, you are nothing but another dubious element that is just, you know, using your slogan to bamboozle the people. So now, on the question of military coups, Kwame Nkrumah taught us one thing, you know, the erstwhile president of Ghana, that whenever a coup happens in Africa, our reaction should be, you know, within the context of two things. Because Kwame Nkrumah said you can understand coups within the context of, again, two things. Kwame Nkrumah described, you know, a section of coups within the African continent as reactionary coups. You know, those that would, you know, come into power through the barrier of gun and bamboozle the people, use the slogans of Pan-Africanism, use the slogan of socialism, use the slogan of revolution, you know, to come into power, when in actual fact what would end up that regime is nothingness. You know, they would transform the economy into their home pocket. They will bring the title of the economy, they will divert it right into their pocket. We have several cases of that. You know, we have the most terrible we've had in Africa is that of Mobutu. You know, what a terrible man. You know, so that's about the most terrible we've had. But again, we've had several cases. You know, Abacha again stands as a classical example of that within the context of Nigerian political history. So we've had reactionary military coups, which Kwame Nkrumah said again we must identify. But Kwame Nkrumah also made mentioning of a section of people that are genuinely interested in transforming their societies through the coming of power. By by taking it to the what
Yeah.
arsenal of the state. You know, Kwame Nkrumah identified these coups as revolutionary nationalist coups. Revolutionary nationalist coups. Within this context, we can be talking about the coup led by Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
You can be talking about, you know, the emergence of NATO in Angola. You can be talking about the emergence of their societies. And that is why, overnight, Thomas Sankara transformed the economy of Burkina Faso. Exactly. You know, because to them, one thing is very, very important. And what is that? What is that thing? A clear understanding of the extent at which the imperialist forces had continuously ensured that our economy, you know, is being treated as a dependent entity.
Yeah.
You know, to break that genes, to break that imperialist control. That's about the first thing that Thomas Sankara did in Burkina Faso. Yeah. So the point is this: it doesn't really matter. Power can be gotten. You can access power through whatever medium. Yeah. You can access power, which I doubt, in actual fact, through the ballot. Of course, all of these elements that are, you know, coming into power through the ballot of some, many people don't understand. Behind the scene is also a consistent, you know, period of armed struggle. You know, you cannot talk about this last election without mentioning the fact that politicians in this country are mobilizing arms. You know, the cases of electoral violence and what have you. Yeah. So you cannot relegate the role of arms, you know, in whatever is to be done. But the point remains that for us, power is about the most important thing. What to do with power. Yeah. You know, power is like water, like one of our persons have said. You know, you can bathe with water, you can drink water, you can do whatever with water. But then, for you to have a productive power, you must devise that power into the liberation of your people. Okay. In the case of Thomas Sankara, he broke totally, you know, the control of the French government, you know, in the economy of that particular country. Yeah. And that's why for us, we really do not care. You see all of these elements in Niger, in Mali, you know, all of these military coup leaders. Well, for us, in addressing their own situation, we are saying to them that these happenings must be well utilized. And that is why we are making concrete demands. You know, in the sense that you cannot break the relationship that these countries have had with French imperialism, you know, for decades, and take us to another imperialist.
But that's what it seems like.
No. But this is it. This is it. If you understand the histories of these countries very well, you understand that if there's anything that needed to be done, let us get rid of, you know, the French. Okay. You cannot imagine the dominance of, you know, the currency of France in these countries, CFA, you know, under the dictate of the French government for decades. That has always been, you know, their modus operandi. They get all of this head of state, these backward elements, and they support their elections. Some, in most cases, you know, they support their military coups, and they give them backward policies. They turn them to errand boys. They turn them to the enemies of the people. Yeah. You know, the French government have consistently do this for decades. So for me, I don't care. But the point is, let us get rid of French imperialism. Why? Because if they are going to now, you know, say, for instance, take themselves, yes, let us admit, they are going to welcome another form of imperialism, but now it will be on the basis of negotiation.
Is that possible?
Yes, exactly. Because now it has to be. It has to be because now the African people did not negotiate the emergence of French imperialism in Africa. We did not negotiate the emergence of British imperialism.
Yes.
So all of these people should keep short. The British politicians, elements that are condemning what is happening, they should keep short. That are saying that the Niger quarters are going to Russia. They should keep short. They have no moral rights to say that. Because in their own situation, we did not negotiate, you know, the emergence of their own form of imperialism. We got their own form of imperialism through blood, you know, through sorrow, tears, and blood. You know, that's the reality in actual fact.
Okay, so one of the most recent coup was the one in Gabon. And in that situation, we're looking at a country with just about 3 million people with amazing natural resources. But then we're also looking at a country that is struggling with about 33% unemployment, poverty, and all of these things. On that ground, and the fact that there's been a family that has been ruling for over 50 years, on that ground, it looks like, yes, that is a coup might be the next way to take them out. But then we are seeing a situation where it's a relative of the same family that is being that is a beneficiary of the coup. How do you explain this on the broad scale of, oh yes, we're trying to fight something, we're trying to push away a problem, and then of course maybe possibly welcoming another, because history says that there is tendency that this goes the same way it has always gone. So I want to ask you, what are the signs you're seeing with this wave of coups? You already mentioned one of them, that of course is an opportunity to negotiate. But does it look like it's going to change anything?
You know, again, I will return to Kwame Nkrumah. You know, and for me, Kwame Nkrumah remains, you know, his works remains quite a body of instructive works that we must return to, you know, towards we achieving the purpose of the African Revolution. Kwame Nkrumah said one thing, that whenever, again, a coup occurs in Africa, like I said earlier on, we shouldn't condemn it. Because these coups are symptomatic effect of two things, and which we can benefit from as oppressed African people. Kwame Nkrumah said that it doesn't really matter if the coup is revolutionary or reactionary. Let them return whatever way to whatever. But what these coups, or what this coup will do, is that it will accelerate the process of African revolution, according to Kwame Nkrumah. Because if the coup is bad, if the plotters are bad, they won't be able to resolve the socio-economic conditions that brought about the coup in the first instance. Are you getting the point I'm making?
Yes.
So within that context, it is like a postponement of a judgment day that will happen, you know, whether we like it or not, ultimately. You know, so for Kwame Nkrumah, he said, the coup can be whatever, it can be reaction, but it will accelerate the process of African revolution, because it will not be able to solve the socio-economic vices, the socio-economic contradictions that bet it. So the people will be yearning for liberation, the continuous, you know, agitation, you know, for a change, for a transformation, for a genuine transformation, will eventually lead us to the path of African revolution. Kwame Nkrumah also said that whether the coup is reactionary or revolutionary, it also, you know, pinpoints to one thing. And what is that? That even members of the ruling class in whatever society at which the coup takes place are now scared of their own existence, to the point that they have to now take to what? Arms. You know, meaning they cannot bamboozle people anymore. They cannot, you know, tell lies to the people anymore. They cannot deceive the people anymore. So they have to resort to what? Arms. So what that means is that members of the ruling class in that society, that days are now invariably numbered. So for Kwame Nkrumah, it doesn't matter whether the coup is revolutionary, whether it is reactionary, but the point remains that it is an accelerative process to the African revolution we are all yearning for.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Fagunwa. I would like to take a short break, and would like to hear from you, our viewers. To reach out to us, you can call us on 0704 9941 The numbers are currently showing on your screen. Do call in to join the conversation, and let's hear your thoughts and also questions for our guests for today. So I would, the number again is 0704 9941 is currently on the screen. While we await your calls, I would like to come back to you, Dr. Fagunwa. Okay, so you said you already said that coup is mostly an accelerator, but then accelerating towards what? There is a situation where the African society is being led by primitive elements, as you've said, who are most likely puppets of this imperialists. So Africa is like, say, 20 years, 30 years behind the rest of the world. So what are we accelerating towards? Catching up or just like determine our fate?
Oh, no, we have got to ultimately decide our fate. I think you cannot pinpoint to an industrialized society today without not pointing to a society that decided to understand its own purpose and understand its own fate. The Asian so-called tigers are what they had today, are what they had today because they made that conscious effort to look inward and, assemble their forces and say, damn the Western nations. Because the dependency relationship, people really do not make reference to this, between the oppressed nations of the world and the Western nations have got to be broken. The relationship for over 500 years have been that of oppression, exploitation, and there is no moving forward if we do not go to that necessary assignment. For the African continent, absolute decolonization, it is a struggle that we have to wage. We must decolonize our educational sector. We must decolonize the entertainment sector, the political sector, the sociocultural sector. We must decolonize even the military sector, and which is the point I was trying to make earlier on. We don't support military coups, but they have got to happen because that's science. It's scientific. We don't support the military coups, yes, but they have got to happen, but we don't. Essentially because the military institution in Africa, unfortunately, has a terrible history. The military institution in Africa has a terrible history. And that is why for some of us, even as at this material point in time, you can see for yourself how neo-colonized the military institution is. Even at this material point in time, through their activities, through their involvement in pro-rich activities against the interest of the people. It has a terrible history. The history of the Nigerian army is the history of violence. The colonial state, the British colonial state, created the Nigerian army in its own violent image. You cannot begin to talk about the history of the Nigerian army without not making references to several military raids, black people, killing black people, on behalf of the British colonizer. That is the history of the Nigerian army. So, we know this, we are conscious of this backward history of this institution. But in moving forward, we are saying that if you are going to stage a military coup in Gabon or whatever, if you are a major player to that coup, you must first admit that the institution that produced you is a colonial institution. Okay. It's an institution that needs to be decolonized, which is what Thomas Sankara did in Burkina. He decolonized the military institution in that country, which is what Fidel Castro did, in Cuba. Many people don't understand it. So for the African continent to move forward, that job of decolonization, absolute decolonization, has got to be done. And it cannot be done by these elements we have in power. And it is conscious. It is a conscious, indifference. They have got to be indifferent to that process. Tinubu has got to be indifferent towards the process of decolonizing the Nigerian nation. A Nana of Ghana has got to be indifferent towards that, because should they do that, their own exploitative intent, their own exploitative interest, will be sabotage. Clearly will be sabotage. So that is why, for us, ultimately, the transformation or the liberation of the African society, or any society for that matter, is the duty of the people. Ultimately, the duty of the people, not the duty of some individuals.
Okay, so there's one of the biggest issues in the African political setting has been the case of sit-tight leaders, leaders who don't know how to relinquish power in any shape or form. And in the cases where they are even going to relinquish the power, they are going to give it to one of their puppets or cronies who's going to continue their reign. That is certainly not democratic. So I want you to give an historical perspective to this. Is democracy based on the election, the ballot system every 4 years, is it an African thing?
Well, I think the error that we have consistently made is to think that democracy is synonymous to progress, or to think that democracy is synonymous to Western democracy.
But it has worked in.
No,
it has worked in.
Where? What society?
Western society.
Oh no, absolutely not. America is under the control, political, economic control of some oligarchs. You know, that's the reality. The American society is a classical example of an oligarchic, society. Many people, we have got to realize this. There's nothing democratic about that nation. I mean, look at their political processes. Look at the electoral college system now. The electoral college system is a dictatorial system. The electoral college system in U.S. is anti-democratic. Because how can a tiny member of a society as huge as that, decide the political fate of that society? That's not democratic. I think we shouldn't make the error of thinking that, democracy is synonymous to Western democracy. Western democracy is, is a form of democracy, not the form of democracy. You have different forms of democracy. You have social democracy, when in actual fact. And let me say this. Within the ambit of Western democracy, election is a requisite.
Yeah.
Within the ambit of social democracy, even distribution of wealth and consumption of wealth is a requisite. Which one should we go for? The one that affords us equitability in the distribution and consumption of wealth, or the one that affords us the opportunity of voting every 4 years, without any major, dividend, without any outcome, without any ultimate result, because people continue. How people continue to make this error of thinking that there's a way out which we can have a transformed Nigerian society by going to the ballot. That is not going to happen under this current dispensation. This current dispensation, this money-back electoral system, political system, one that we have been so much, meshed into, that we really do not understand that there can be an alternative. Yeah. You cannot come out as an aspiring whatever in this society without having had to have stolen wealth one way or the other. Yeah. You cannot come out that you want to be a counselor in whatever, whatever space in this society without not having to have had stolen wealth one way or the other, directly or indirectly. Because how do you fund the backward, electoral system that we have? I mean, electoral campaigns, electoral processes that we have in this country. How do you fund them? It is almost impossible for a common person to emerge as whatever in this society. So, is that what we call democracy? This is nothing but hypocrisy. Malcolm X had said this long time ago. Malcolm X, in fact, demystified U.S. so-called democracy. He said there's no democracy in U.S. That's what you have in U.S. is hypocrisy. If there were to be democracy in U.S., you wouldn't have the institutionalization of anti-black racism in U.S. Institutionalization of anti-black racism that still exists to date in America. If indeed democracy were to exist in that society, you wouldn't have the invasion of people's privacy by American CIA and American FBI and all of this. So for me, as an individual or as a member of a Pan-African Revolutionary Organization, we are extremely care about it. Don't parrot Western democratic tenets to us, because it is not going to get us to anywhere. It has never gotten us to anywhere. The alternative that we have got to look into is how we can use the basic practices and principles of social democracy, to elevate the socio-economic conditions of our people. And what do we mean by social democracy? Social democracy is a fancy word for, the actual practices of scientific socialism. When we are talking about a society where the existing resources in that society will be under the, will be under the control, the absolute control and management of the people themselves.
Are there historical perspectives?
Human societies have existed. Human societies have existed for thousands of years under communal fixtures, communal attributes. Let us don't forget that, socialism is just an advanced form of communalism. So for today, people that are telling us today that it is not possible for you to have a society where, resources will be shared evenly, they should go back to human societies. Now, the history of human societies, they should go back to the history of communalism in Africa and see for themselves how resources were to some, to some reasonable extent, highly appreciated extent. Resources were evenly distributed and evenly, consumed. Not this backward society that we have today, where you have, an Aliko Dangote, deciding the fate of our oil sector. I mean, that is nothing but a primitive society, not a society where Oxfam had told us that the wealth of 5 Nigerians will solve the crisis of poverty in this country. This is nothing but an uncivilized society. This is a society that we cannot continue to live under.
All right. So, listening to you now, a neutral mind would say, okay, we have 2 options: the elections and arms resistance, as in your words. I want you to look at this choice, or the possible choices available to the people in order to ensure stability in African countries, international relations. There's always this reaction of the international community whenever there's a coup, whenever there's crisis in a country. How do we find a balance between these 2 extremes?
You see, the point is, no one prays for coups, because there will be killings either way. Even where some of us don't really care, because consistently the Nigerian government kills us. The Nigerian Tinubu, all these people, they kill us on daily basis. If the Nigerian government, because I know this government is running etasketa, wanting to curtail or preclude the possibility of a military coup in Nigeria. And that's why they are stationing, UK, the warship of the United Kleptomaniac is currently in Lagos. That's why they are going, and people don't see this. No one is making reference to this. But the point is that if African government or the Nigerian government do not want coup, then let them create an inclusive society. Let them decolonize the current electoral system that we have.
And they are beneficiaries of the system.
No. We are pushing, you don't understand. We are pushing the most impossible to them because they will never do it. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
That's why the United Nations has no moral right to condemn, the happenings in any of these West African Francophone countries. What have they done to solve the crisis of poverty in this country other than to support the existence of poverty, to support, the criminal existence of the international finance capitals, to support the criminal existence of the multinational corporations, the American multinational corporations, the British, European multinational corporations in the, destruction of the economies of this country? What has the United Nations done, in solving the crisis of uranium in Egypt? What have they done? Now the people took to guns, and you are saying that, no, I think we shouldn't be arrogant. In people deciding their fate, let us allow them to do so. It doesn't really matter. We are talking about the question of life and death, and you want people, you think that you as an outsider, you can rationalize what they are going through. You can begin to tell them how they fight, their way to liberation. I think we should keep short. I think the UN and all of these backward international organizations, have the right to keep short, have the duty of keeping short. And the Nigerian government also has the duty of keeping short, because the Nigerian government has never played a prominent role in the economic transformation of any society in West Africa under the emblem of ECOWAS. ECOWAS has never been anything. ECOWAS has never for once brought any economic, major transformative programs down for the African continent or down for the West African people to take to. So now they are deciding, I think they should keep short. But the point remains that for us, within the context of what we are facing right now in this country, should there be a possibility of military coup, what would be our reaction to it? Our reaction to it wouldn't be to condemn it. And our reaction to this possibility will not also be to prevent the possibility of it. I think it would be arrogant for anyone to say that let us stop the possibility of a military coup in Nigeria. No. For those that, because in the early years of the 2000s, we had people, scholars writing books, political scholars, political analysts in Africa writing books saying that to hell with the days of military coups in Africa. But they have forgotten that the socio-economic conditions that created these schools in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s are still with us. In fact, under more terrible conditions, we are living under more terrible conditions. You cannot talk about the existence of the African continent today without not making reference to the existence of an army of poor people. Army of poor people. And funny enough, or fortunately, a best number of these people that are poor are young people without hope for the future, young people that have their talent consistently being destroyed because they are living in any part of Africa. You have this mass, existence of young people without hope, without future, and you think that there won't be a backlash. You think that we are going to negotiate our way. These youth are ready to vote. These youth are no. The Nigerian youth are not ready to wait for another 4 years before getting, and that's why some of them, in their own understanding of what is to be done, they have accepted to the culture of Exodus, Japa and all of that. Some of us, we have no problem with this because it is nothing but a reflection of, again, the existence of the backward, terrible socioeconomic condition we are living in.
So you've talked extensively about arms resistance as a possible way, and then I'm from the mind of a viewer now, I'm looking at it that, I don't want violence. I want peace. I'm enjoying this peace. And it's also one of the things that people would say, like, let's always embrace peace and no violence. So I want to pose this question. Are there hybrid approaches or alternative strategies to, so the ballot has not worked, evidently. The coup has also not worked, evidently. Are there other alternative strategies, or maybe an hybrid or an adaptation of a little bit of this and that to get us out of this imperialist quagmire?
To say that we don't want war is, an acceptance of perhaps an unacceptable state of ignorance, because the point remains that on consistent basis, the Nigerian government, the Nigerian state, members of the ruling class in this country have been waging war, against the Nigerian people. I really don't, there's no day at which I wake up, I don't think that this government is at war with me. No, that's the point. Because my normal existence is consistently being the longevity, the possibilities consistently being threatened by the Nigerian government through, a backward policies, a backward economic, sociocultural policies. So for me, I see violence every day, and I think that we must also understand the fact that for some of us, we are extremely grateful for the time we are living in. Because of, again, some persons, some individuals gave up their lives to ensure that some of us, will be able to live today. And that's why some of our people must be grateful enough. They must be less arrogant in the understanding that people gave their lives in the past for the lives we're enjoying today, for the little things we're enjoying today. It's like what we were discussing with some of our brothers sometimes ago, that for the African, immigrants in US, in UK, and all that, they have the duty of understanding the history of black people in those societies, so that you don't end up being an ignorant person living in a white world, thinking that you have clearly arrived, forgetting the fact that black people in the society upon which you have arrived today for several decades have to fight in their ways into the schools, have to fight in their ways into the universities, have to fight in their ways into the factories which you have occupied today, thinking that you are the boss. So there must be that logical understanding that we are living a borrowed life, and that's why we must consistently fight, for the betterment of not just our own immediate self, but the betterment of the mass of our people. So the point remains this: for me, it is not true to say that military coups are essentially bad inherently, that we cannot get any good dividend out of these military coups. No. We've mentioned the case of Burkina Faso. In fact, let us be truthful with ourselves. For whatever it is, regardless of the few limitations, the regime of Murtala Muhammad in this country, was a progressive regime. A regime that understood what was wrong, not just with Nigeria, but the entirety of the African continent. We've never had a clear-headed regime, as that regime. We've never had it. We've never had a clear-headed regime as that regime. See this particular point in time. So what are we talking about? All of these regimes all of these so-called civilian administrations, have they been able to make any change? No. Have they been able to transform anything? Have they been able to do anything major, within the African continent? No, they have not been able to do so. So for me, it is the question of, again, what to do with power. How you understand the powerfulness of power, and how power can be used, can be utilized to better the conditions of the people is perhaps more important to me.
Okay. So again, I'd like to invite our listeners to call us and join the conversation on 0870-499-41413. The numbers is currently displaying on your screen. And back to you, Dr. Fagunwa. So now there are no in-betweens. It's either we fight for all of these things, and of course, however it might take, or just continue with the status quo. That's what you're saying.
Oh, no. We cannot continue with this status quo. Okay. And we cannot continue with it because, the early we have been catching has gotten so much that we cannot just survive for a day. We cannot survive for a minute under this current hellish condition. The condition is extremely terrible for every one of us. We're talking about a Nigerian society where we have been told that the chase of tertiary education now is such an expensive commodity. We are talking about a Nigerian state where education intentionally is to be taken off from the reach of the poor people. So for me, it's the question of life and death. It's the question of, as Kwame said in the 60s, the ballot or the bullet. We have got to pick to one.
No in-betweens.
No, we have got to. And I've got to tell you the fact that with the way things, with the nature and character upon which things are going, we have got to make the most difficult decision eventually. And you see, for some of us, we are open to the ballot. Not that we are not open to the alternative, but you see, we are only open to the ballot to the extent at which we are sure we are guaranteed of inclusivity. We are guaranteed of public participation. Not a situation where INEC, as an electoral body, a body that ought to be independent, will turn out to become, a fan, an accomplice to an existing ruling party, where prominent members of the electoral body would be card-carrying party members, of the ruling political party. I think we are not. The Nigerian people are sick and tired of these shenanigans, and for us, we have got to make a decision.
Okay, so should we take this other option? Are there ethical?
It is not for us to decide.
So
you see, it is the socio-economic conditions, and you see,
it is already biting.
Yeah, exactly. So for us, for some of us, this happenings, this poverty, this homelessness, this joblessness, this insecurity, all of these things, all of these unfortunate realities, they are unfortunate in themselves. We are sad, but there's a part of us that is also jubilating, because as Kwame Nkrumah told us, these conditions, the continuous existence of these conditions, will accelerate the process of the African Revolution. So yes, the Tinubu government, the Tinubu regime currently absolutely has no understanding of the way the economy has to go. Like, they know nothing about the management of the economy of this country. That's why they will remove subsidy. That's why they will put us in this, physical mess we are in. That's why dollar is what it is now against naira. That's why they are mismanaged. That's why they would surrender the entirety of our oil sector to a guy. They don't have the alternative. They don't have a Tinubu regime so far hasn't done anything different
Yeah.
from what, you know,
Previous
his comrade, his brother, his friend, you know, did.
But
You know, they haven't done anything.
he
They haven't-
said he was going to continue.
Exactly. So, but you would have expected that this is a government that would attempt to, you know, come up with something, you know, in a way, physically different from, no matter how little it is. Because the guy before him, was heavily condemned by the Nigerian masses. Despite the fact that they are responsible for him. You know, so you would have thought that this one would come and, you know, you would do one or two things to give a face value. But they don't know what to do because...
But do you think it's too early to call?
No, you see, for
Do
us...
you think?
No, it is not too early.
Okay.
You know, because it is like our people used to say, you know, what will happen, you would know it at night now, you know.
Okay.
Are you getting the point I'm making?
Yeah.
This government came with the notion of deregulation, that they are going to remove subsidy.
Yeah.
You know, you can imagine how backward that can, and so you think that government can genuinely, you know, solve the economic crisis we are facing in this country? Oh, no. And we must also make reference to this because during their campaigns, you know, you would have, during the era of campaigns, right, they articulated, you know, the things they were going to do. You know, this government said that in the transformation of the economy of Nigeria, that they are going to look into the private sector, you know. But you would also see that this government clearly has no logical understanding of how the private sector itself, you know, can be tailored into any developmental part. You know, because look at it. The last time they met private investors and all of that, you know, they were literally begging these people for money. The Nigerian government was literally, they met themselves in Asoro. They, you know, so what that literally means is that they don't even have a clear understanding because it doesn't even exist. Private investors exist essentially to meet the resources of the homeland. You know, so you see, we are still under this backward illusion of perambulation. You know, as fella had said, we are still perambulating. You know, thinking that we can somehow transform, you know, our economy by handling the entirety of our resources to the whims and caprices of private individuals. That cannot be possible.
So, we're rounding off now, and I would like you to talk about. So, something came up recently about the capitalist tendencies of this government. And that is against the socialist tendencies of the previous government, and also what the ruling party itself stands for as the socialist ideology. But then removing subsidy, removing education, the investment in education, and all of that, that doesn't look like socialist. That looks full capitalist. And then the understanding of these realities by the government, like you've said, it seems like there's a confusion somewhere.
I don't think this government prides itself has ever mentioned that they have any socialist policy. Of course, I understand that the dramatics personnel, the main man, Tinubu, you know, used to go around that he's a mentee of Obafemi Awolowo. But I think that mentorship is only to the extent at which he can wear his glasses, you know, not to the extent at which he can transform the economy of human societies. In accepting to be a mentee of Obafemi Awolowo would be that you'd be interested in the socialization of the resources of the homeland. But this guy has never been interested in that. This guy is, you know, is an unapologetic, you know, capitalist. You know, the wealth, the ill-gotten wealth that he parades himself with, himself and his cronies, that they shoot up their chest as if they have some economic or financial genuinity, is nothing but a product of crime. You know, decades of, you know, involvement in, you know, several, robbery cases, you know, financial robbery cases in actual fact. And we are not saying this because they are in fact, they are facts, you know. No matter how much we run away from it, no existing politician in this country, you know, would emerge without not having had the access to stolen wealth and what have you. That has consistently been their trademark. So for me, I don't see any part of this, any fiber of this government breathing in or breathing out, socialist principles. And I don't. I mean, they are genuinely interested in, the destruction of our economy by, private means, and that's why one of the most attractive person to this current regime government is Lemelu. This Afri-capitalism guy. He has been going on around with this guy. They have been touring what an illusion. So what that tells you is that all of these elements have no clear understanding of the period at which we are in, and the right alternative is.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think they are genuinely, or they are interested, or they know anything about scientific socialist principles or practices.
Again, as we round up, recently, this is currently what is going on. After the elections, there's been a lot of backlash, and there's been a lot of, would I say, I'm talking the Nigerian context now. There's been a call for help to the international community. So you see Chimamanda writing to the U.S. president. You see a lot of people calling U.S. president, FBI, come and intervene. Do you think, based on imperialist tendencies or imperialist realities, that the international community can support African nations in their efforts to overcome what is currently going on?
Don't you understand?
Regardless of the method.
The international communities have shared complicit, histories in the development of the African continent or the African people. You cannot pinpoint to any major international organization that is not responsible for what Africa is today, side by side with the roles of the errand boys we have in government offices in this country. Are you getting the point I'm making? There is no existing internet, and that is why for me, we don't think that what we have to do right now is to begin to look for support from members of or nation states in the international community, because the support we've had, particularly from those from the Western Bloc, the support we've had thus far breeds many into underdevelopment, breeds many into our continuous despondency, as a continent as a whole. The support we've been getting from these people thus far is again breeds many into the opening or the exposure of our national security, the building of military bases across Africa, US military base, UK military base, French military. These are the support that these people have been giving us. And we are saying right now that we're tired of this support. This kind of support do not get anyone to anywhere. These are supports that would hold you down, that will keep you down. So we are saying right now, as at this material point in time, to hell with this international support that you are calling for. Okay. The support that we are calling for right now is the support of the working people. Is the support of movements. Is the support of oppressed people all over the world. And this is happening already. Mass of oppressed people globally are now converging online, on what have you, over an agreement in getting rid of their their enemies in their distinct countries or in their distinct societies.
All right, sir. Final word now. What are the prospects and challenges for Africa in defeating imperialism based on this new wave of coup that we are seeing, based on current realities? What are the prospects and challenges, and how can Africa defeat imperialism in the 21st century? Is it now or never? Oh, yeah. Considering the evolving geopolitical landscape.
Yeah, I think it's our man, that once said, Fanon, that, each generation out of relative obscurity would always have a mission to accomplish. It is for that generation to fulfill that mission or to betray it. The mission of this generation, or the mission of the time at which we are living in, is to defeat neocolonialism, is to defeat imperialism. And in defeating imperialism, in defeating neocolonialism, no dramatist personnel that will be involved. those that will be involved are the people themselves. You know, the people will be involved in their own liberation. Of course, people, organizations can play vanguard roles, but ultimately it is the people. But in doing so, our people, you know, must come down to a logical understanding that this ballot system, this electoral system stands to be anachronistic. You know, I mean, its current dispensation, in its current existing state, the electoral system, the political systems cannot guarantee us our liberation. If the bullets do so, well, we'll say let the happenings, the social contradiction decide for themselves. And if that is going to be it for some of us, well, we won't stop history from taking its natural course. But the point remains that in liberating ourselves, we must be mindful of the continuous existence of the colonial institutions that have consistently held us down. We must make concrete demands in moving forward. The political system that we have in this country has got to be dismantled. We must come up with systems and institutions that would understand our social realities and conditions as African people. We must come up with systems and institutions that would emanate from our histories of struggle, that would emanate from, you know, the distinct peculiarities that we have as African people. We must understand the fact that moving forward, there's clearly you know, a necessity for us to understand that we aren't so, you know, different as the African, you know, as members of the ruling class in Africa have consistently told us that we don't have so much ethnic groups in Africa, that we are not so different, that we don't have so much religions in Africa. We must come down to a clear understanding of the fact that we only have two religions, we have two ethnic groups in Africa, that of the poor and that of the rich, so that the poor will be able to understand clearly that the ruling class cannot use Christianity or Islam or any Abrahamic religion in dividing us. They cannot use any language in dividing us because we're brothers and sisters. We are comrades in arms. You know, so moving forward, we must be able to demystify, you know, the ways, the methods at which members of the tiny, you know, African ruling class have consistently used in holding us down. We must understand the devices, the mottos, you know, in order for us to be able to move forward. But then ultimately, the process of building a socialist, you know, liberated African society is about the ultimate for us. If we are not going to have a socialist Africa, then we are not going to have a liberated Africa. Because the point remains, Kwame Nkrumah told us, the African continent remains the richest. The African continent has what other societies do not have, and what these societies that do not have them do not want to pay for. You know, we have all of these resources, they don't want to pay because you cannot pay for these resources. That's the extent at which they are much. The enormity of African natural resources is beyond mere exaggeration. But all of these countries, the imperialist nations, they understand this, and that's why they don't want to pay for them. So we must come down to that, you know, radical understanding that until we decide on, you know, institutionalizing radical socialist policies, economic policies, ensuring that the entirety of the oil sector, for instance, is under the control of the people themselves, not some private people under the emblem of discourse. You know, not a situation where, I mean, under the emblem of Dangote owning, what's his name, refineries, building refinery for us. We must understand that a society not where discos are the ones controlling the electricity, the power sector, the electric sector, not a situation where rich individuals who know nothing about the power sector are the one deciding, you know, the fate of the sector. Yeah. That is what socialism means. Socialism means that the actual, you know, managers, controllers of the sectors will be the ones, you know, deciding the fate. The electricity workers will be the ones to decide the fate of our electric, you know, our sector. The oil workers will be the one to do so, not some elements that have no genuine interest in developing these sectors other than to, you know, make profit.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. That has been Dr. Temitope Fagunwa, aka Maberu.
The Marvel is not an AK, it's actually my name.
Oh. Oh, all right. That's noted. So I'll say Dr. Temitope Fagunwa Maberu.
Absolutely.
An Afrobeat musician, a historian, and a lecturer at the Osun State University in the Department of History and International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we go, a little bit of comments we have seen on our live feed. This is from Thank God Okemute Samson. He said, the coup will continue to spread across Africa because of the style of governance by the so-called democratic system we are currently witnessing in most African states. Until elections are conducted free and fair and the citizens enjoy the benefits of democracy, coups will continue. Most West African state elections are disputed and the government in place lack the legitimacy and moral rights to condemn coups because they all came in through a democratic coup. That has been some of the sentiments shared by our analysts, in-house analyst. Chijoke Igbokwe says, this is great. Will this continue or just for today? Of course, it's a weekly affair right now. It's going to continue. Lawrence Chukwuma Onyeoka Eziaguba says, and the criminals will always tell you we have to protect our democracy. That is not existing. Awotunde Oluwadare says, I agreed with some submissions, but need to know that realistic society on your communal views are utopia. That has been some of the comments we have received on our live feed on the show today. And it has been an eventful 1 hour, 30 minutes on the Sahara TV Breakfast Show today. We urge you to join us next week for another bumper package. Thank you very much.